Okay, welcome to the second of today's seminars. My name is Patrick Capia. I'm the Vice President of Counseling for HS2 Academy. So today's seminar is largely about what you need to do now and during the summer, because I know that the onset of the coronavirus has really changed a lot of people's plans in terms of what you were hoping to do in terms of your extracurriculars, your testing, and of course, the plans that you've made for the summer probably are no longer, what they were like a few months ago. So we want to go through, a few key strategies to help you understand why it's so important to really take advantage of this time in order to help develop and cultivate your profile of extracurriculars. Okay, so let me go ahead and start the presentation. All right, so as we go through the presentation, if you do have any questions, please don't use the chat box. Try to put your questions in the Q&A section. Only use the chat if it's a clarification about the seminar, like, you can't hear me for audio or something, or you got, you got booted from the actual seminar and you just needed to go back in or something. So try as much as possible to put the questions there so that I will answer them in the order that we get them. Okay? All right, so as a quick disclaimer, please refrain from recording any of the information you see here. We will make a recording available via video. So, please try not to do that right now, okay? And save any questions you have until the end of the presentation. Okay, so before we get into the details of the strategies we'd recommend for all of you, I want to talk to you about the importance of extracurricular activities. Why, especially now, is it important for you to have some really good activities? First of all, as you're probably aware, because of the coronavirus, a lot of activities that you normally would be doing around the same time have changed, some of which are no longer available, right? So I think the biggest thing right now is that the other factors for college admissions, things like standardized testing, things like your grades, which tended to be more important than your activities, have sort of been changed a little bit in terms of how colleges are going to evaluate it. So there's now a little bit more importance in terms of what you're doing for activities. For one, many colleges have now gone test optional, right? That means that it's not like they don't accept these tests, but because they're fully aware that many people will not be able to take the necessary standardized tests because of test cancellations, too many people now taking the test later in the fall as opposed to spacing it out throughout the spring. They want to try to give people a little bit more of a chance without having to rely on those traditional metrics that they use, like SAT or ACT, right? So in this case, testing as a factor for admissions is probably going to be a little bit less important than it was in previous application seasons. Also, the majority of high schools are sort of changing the grading system that they're using, right? So many high schools are now shifting to a pass-fail system or credit, no credit, as opposed to giving previous grades. Which unfortunately will shrink the base of graded work that you have, right? So the transcript that you're submitting to colleges, whereas before you would have primarily most of 10th and 11th grade as the main thing that colleges would look at, that's probably going to be cut down to basically by an extra semester, probably two, if they're no longer going to be looking at potentially first semester senior year because it's pass fail. Right, so there's going to be more importance now in order to look for other options to sort of maybe boost your grades. And this is especially bad for people who, say, for example, were depending on grades this semester and next semester to be able to bring up their grades. Right, so let's say, for example, you got off on the wrong foot, 9th grade, 10th grade. It probably would have been really important for you to be able to get some good grades this semester and next. But unfortunately, if your school going pass fail, that's going to make it really hard. Another thing to consider is that almost all extracurricular clubs for your school have now been put on hold. For many of the students I've talked to, there's not much going on. The moderator isn't doing anything. The students aren't meeting on a regular basis. So I think it's really important for students to really think proactively. Yes, in a way that sort of puts everybody on the same playing field because some people had more access to extracurriculars, but now everybody has, uniformly none, right? So it really does present an opportunity if you look at it the right way. Because if you are willing to be proactive, if you take the initiative to do certain things, then your extracurricular profile will look more competitive than students who are simply content to sit by and do nothing, right? So in a way, now is that perfect opportunity for you to be creative, for you to try new things, to think outside the box and try to find new activities that you can do, even if it's not necessarily like sponsored activities by your school in terms of official clubs, right? It doesn't really matter if it's an official club or not. As long as you're doing a certain activity, you can always put it down on your college applications, both on the Common App and on the UC app. All right, so I want to frame things first in terms of contextualizing how colleges typically look at your activities in the first place. So among my many educational experiences, I served as a Harvard interviewer for about 7 years or so. And one of the things that we did was we rated and evaluated students based on the extracurricular profiles. So I wanted to share a little bit about how Harvard treated students. And I think a lot of Ivy League schools probably use the same criteria anyway, right? So students were rated out of a scale of 1 to 6, I guess here. Technically really just the first 4, because 5 and 6 are sort of like for unusual circumstances. So if you're looking at it on a scale of 1, 2, 3, 4, based on your level of extracurricular involvement, a 1, which is really rare, right, is reserved for students who have either national or international recognition already in something, right? You win like a national level award, an international level award, that's pretty substantial, right? Not something that says it's national, but it only really involves like maybe a few local schools. Or students who have like really professional level potential in something, right? So like maybe, you're 17, but you're so good at something that you could be pretty much professional now, right? So that's what they consider like a 1, right? Or truly unusual achievement, right? And they keep that kind of vague on purpose because, it's hard to decide or put a label on what they consider truly unusual achievement, right? So it's all relative. They look at the context of everything, okay? A 2, which is probably the most frequent of all the serious candidates to these top schools, would have substantial school-wide, regional, or state recognition, which means, typically people who are like competitive at their state level or people who've done, gotten awards regionally or statewide. This would probably be where you'd fall in, right? Or students who have like major contributions to their school clubs, are maybe like president of 2 or 3 clubs, but nothing really beyond like the regional level. And this would be where they would fall, right? Now, of course, since a lot of people are going to fall in the 2 or maybe 3 range, a lot of top schools will even have like pluses or minuses to that. So there's a little bit more of a gradient for them to see this, right? So we used to be able to rate people in terms of 2+, 2, or 2-, right? So that there's a little bit more of a distinction there in that range. A 3 would be solid participation, but without distinction. In other words, like there are a lot of students who are very active in their school, participate in a lot of clubs and activities, but, they don't get any individual achievement. They don't have any substantial awards, right? They would probably fall into that category, right? And of course, a 4 is like little or no participation. Maybe you have 1 or 2 clubs, maybe just go there regularly, but nothing really amounts to it. Like you don't involve yourself in any competitions or any other ways that you can distinguish yourself or achieve something, right? So that's pretty much going to be a 4. Okay, now, of course, the UCs will typically have their own criteria as well. So this is taken from the common data set of UC Irvine, just to give you an example, right? So as you can see here, extracurriculars are pretty important. Of course, there's the academic factors like how hard are your classes, what GPA you got, and of course, things like test scores, obviously your application essay is pretty important. Now, of course, you'll note here that the UCs don't factor in recommendations because they don't really ask for any recommendation letters. So among these other features, though, it's important to realize that extracurricular activities are important, not just because it's its own category, but how expansive and how well accomplished you are in terms of your extracurriculars also will factor into other aspects or other admissions factors. What I mean by this is that if, say, for example, you have a lot of unique and interesting activities, you'll probably be able to write some pretty cool essays based on that, right? Because you'll have a wider range of experiences to draw from. You could be more articulate about all these different things because you've had some more involvement that would be like related to your major, for instance, or you have unique activities that make you more, like stand out a little bit more from everybody else. Now, of course, there's also talent and ability. So being involved in a lot of extracurriculars could be a good place for you to showcase those talents or abilities. But even things like the interview, right? So the UCs don't do interviews, but for private schools that do, for instance, having a good range of activities can make it so that you have more talking points. You have more things to basically sort of like brag about or be able to talk to the interviewer to show that you really are very much involved, right? So extracurriculars, very important. They set the tone for a lot of the other admissions factors that you will be evaluated on. Okay, so let's talk about clubs first, because that's obviously the most immediately impacted thing, right? Because everybody with the stay-at-home orders, yes, many of you are having like online classes, you're having Zoom classrooms to sort of replace what you would normally do in the classroom. But the one glaring omission there is that schools aren't really doing anything to facilitate any club work, right? So this is probably one of the biggest hits in terms of your profile because you don't have much in terms of clubs. Okay, however, there are things that you can do, right? If you are willing to take the initiative and try to be proactive, you can do things to really go ahead and enhance your extracurricular profile. First of all, you can just get together with your fellow club members, just talk to them and try to see if you can, set up informal meetings to discuss maybe topics related to your club. So let's say, for example, you're part of a model UN club. You guys can actually just do like mock sessions together, right? It doesn't have to be officially in the context of school or with any other students, right? You guys can just have enough of a group to basically get things going, or you could try to proactively try to reach friends in other schools and other programs and try to see if you guys can set up informal stuff, right? In debate, for instance, I did debate in high school and college. When there weren't any tournaments, we just set up things with our friends from other schools and we had what are called scrimmages, right? So just informal practice rounds where you could still get some work in, even if it's not necessarily like an actual formal competition, right? So these days, it's pretty easy to do a lot of activities online. You can just basically do like, like video conference rooms where you can do certain activities, even if it's not like an officially sanctioned thing by your school, okay? You can also use this time to do some valuable research, right? Prepare material for next year's club meetings if you're an officer, for instance, or just develop your skills, right? So like, for instance, in the context of like debate, for instance, you can watch debate rounds, you could practice doing rebuttals. There are a lot of things that you can do during this time to sort of get ahead and get better, right? Or you could research next year's topic in debate, for instance, right? For other things like DECA, FBLA, you could just use now as vital studying time for those conferences if and when they start, okay? Another thing you could do is tutor younger students online based on your club, right? So I know for activities like math counts, students who've been competitive in terms of math competitions in their high schools will sometimes work with the local middle school, maybe even as early as elementary school sometimes, to help students out with like math type competitions. You could still very much do that, right? In fact, the elementary school students and middle school students have even less to do right now because their teachers and their schools are giving them less work. So in a way, that's an opportunity for you to be proactive and try to get them involved, okay? You can also try to create a website with content relevant to your club or activity, okay? There's tons you can find online. You can go ahead and try your hand at developing your own website with content relevant to your individual, individual activities, right? You can also pursue self-initiated projects related to your club or activity. For instance, if you're into like engineering or robotics, you probably wouldn't have access to the normal robotics things at school, but you could maybe build your own computer. You can order parts online, right? You don't even have to go for like the full-on like super expensive one, because I know a lot of families are sort of budgeting their money right now. So you could go for like a budget build, I guess, right? You can publish your own ebooks, right? There are a lot of things that are pretty low cost or possibly even free, right? So if there's a topic that you're sort of like, you consider yourself an expert on, you can be an author. You can write your own book on a certain subject, right? You can also create and upload YouTube videos with content that's related to your club, okay? Keep in mind that even if it's not something that's officially sanctioned or endorsed by the school, you can still set up these informal club meetings and be able to put it down on your college applications, much the same way you would do normal clubs, right? It's not like schools, colleges and universities are like bookkeepers where they have to say like, oh, we need to see every single verified hour. I think now more than ever, schools are going to give you a lot of leeway in terms of which clubs or activities that you're going to be reporting on your college application. So it's important for you to, keep an open mind, try to look for different ways that you can still be involved in your club or activity. Okay, keep in mind that especially for event-based clubs or activities where you had a big competition, you had a big tournament, or you qualified for something, you could still report that on your college applications, right? You could just mention that, oh, it was canceled because of the coronavirus, right? And that's also true, we'll talk about this later on, for summer programs. If you happen to get in some really competitive summer programs, you could very well just go ahead and report that on your college application saying that you were accepted to this really prestigious and very selective summer program, but because of everything that was happening this summer, you weren't able to attend, or they just simply didn't have it, got canceled, right? So don't fret just because, things got canceled that you were planning for, because you could still report that to colleges. Okay, let's move on to test preparation. Here's another component that I think has been thrown for a loop because of everything that's going on. Okay, so as you may be aware right now, the last time we had one of these sessions on standardized testing 2 weeks ago, I kind of mentioned that the June test was the one that you should be trying to aim for at this point, since the April and May tests got canceled, but now even the June test got canceled. All right, so one of the things you could do is go ahead and at least plan to go ahead and take some of the fall test dates, August and September, right? So we have no idea whether or not those are going to be canceled as well, but I think it's safer for you to go ahead and plan to take those. Now, worst case scenario, if those test dates do get canceled, I know that there have been reports about ACT and College Board devising their own in-home online tests, much the same way they did for AP tests. Obviously, it's going to be a different format. It's not going to be like the free response sections that they do for the AP tests, but that's an option that's on the table. They're trying to find ways to do it so that it's fair, so that to minimize the chances of people cheating on these tests. But they want to find a way for people to still get that testing in as much as possible, okay? So in the meantime, so things just got pushed back. That just means that, hey, you could use an extra few months to go ahead and prepare for these tests. So take a few more practice tests, take a class if you hadn't already been enrolled in a class. I think these are good ways for you to be involved and to really start to kind of like, try to maximize what score potential you have in either SAT or ACT, okay? Now, keep in mind that even though many of these colleges are now going test optional, which is good news, especially if, say, for example, testing is not your forte, a high score can still really impress some top colleges. So don't just say like, hey, I don't have to worry about testing anymore because most of these schools are test optional, the UCs don't want it. Okay, so it's a very individual decision based on what your situation is. So in other words, if let's say, for example, your grades are kind of okay and you kind of need the testing to sort of boost your profile a little bit more, then yes, I would still push to try to have a test. If, say, for example, you're a straight A student, but your weakness has been standardized testing, okay, maybe you want to use that extra time to just beef up your extracurriculars, take a few more college classes instead of preparing for SAT or ACT. But I think for most of you, I think it's still relevant for you to go ahead and prepare and take SAT and ACT. Okay, so one new development is that there have been now a few colleges that have said that they're no longer going to be considering SAT subject tests. Right. So most recently, the last month or so, MIT and Yale have both announced that they're no longer going to be considering subject tests. It's not like it's optional. It's not like it's recommended. They just won't look at it at all. Right. And so that's a big change from previous years, of course. Right. So one of the key things to look at that strategically is that, yes, it's a few schools, but there would be still some schools that will probably look at it. So you don't want to completely just scrap that and not having to worry about it at all. You have to take a look at your college list and sort of make a broad-based decision for what would be applicable for most of your schools, okay? So if, however, it looks like, based on your college list, none of your schools really need it anyway, except for maybe one, but you're okay switching those 1 or 2 schools, then yeah, it could be a valid strategy for you to decide to maybe sort of shift gears and focus on some other things instead, okay? All right. As I mentioned earlier, SAT 1 and ACT may have in-home versions. We just, we'll let you know. We'll update you via email if that actually does happen, right? For now, at least, one of the few key things that you could do is you can sign up for HS2's online SAT and ACT classes, right? So like I normally teach the ACT English portions, right, myself on Fridays. So if you want to prepare for the ACT, yes, it got pushed back probably now to September or so. But you can use this time to really sort of gear up and get more comfortable with the test, okay? All right, so one of the few things that you can do during this time, and probably pretty important right now too, is try to look for opportunities for you to volunteer online, okay? So why is it important for you to even volunteer in the first place? Well, for a few reasons. One, it's there to show colleges that you care about making an impact. Right? So many of these colleges and universities are nonprofit and they're very mission oriented, right? They're looking for students to make an impact in society, be difference makers, people who can actually do well and make the university proud, right? Give them a good reputation because you're doing some amazing things impacting society for the better. right? So, and that's good for colleges because then they will get more wealthy donors to donate money because they see the good things that Princeton is doing or Johns Hopkins is doing, right? So for now, at least, it's not as important for you to worry about racking up hours than it is to show some genuine passion for whatever you're helping out with. I think colleges are less impressed with just like sheer gaudy numbers, like, you know, have like, oh, I have over 150 hours this year, if you're not really showing that you're doing it because you genuinely care about that particular cause, right? So if all they see are the hours on your activity list, but you're not really evidencing this in other ways, like a recommendation letter or possibly writing about why it's so important for you to volunteer and things like your college essays, then it won't be as possibly impactful as all that time that you're spending doing it, okay? In fact, about 4 years ago, there was a report published at Harvard's Education School, right? There was a whole bunch of admissions officers from all these top schools that met together, and they had this discussion, they had this big conference about trends in admissions, what they want to see, what would they like in terms of the incoming group of students. And one of the big takeaways from that is that they wanted to see a genuine commitment to community service, right? And one of the key recommendations from that report, it says, we also recommend that students undertake at least a year of sustained service or community engagement, right? So it's not about like piling up hours in one big thing like, oh, I did a trip to China and taught some kids English or something, and I racked up like 100 hours by doing those 2 weeks, and then I stopped doing volunteering for the rest of my high school career. That's not nearly as important. To be honest, they even warned about like exotic foreign trips, right? They said like, oh, we don't want people to game the system and make it look like you have a lot of volunteering if it's not a regular commitment. So at HS2, we're really looking for, or we encourage you to have more consistent, you know, volunteer opportunities where you're really genuinely trying to help out, you know, for various causes that are important to you. Another thing to keep in mind is that there's not really a tier list as to what kind of community service is more important than others, right? So I get asked that question all the time for seminars like, oh, which kind of volunteering do college people like the most? And that's what I want to do, or that's what I want my kid to do. I'll be honest. I mean, you know, people have their own biases, I guess, as to which one they find better. But I think for the most part, admissions officers are trained to look at them all more or less in the same lens, right? So, you know, do what's important to you. Do what you think you can kind of like actually make the best or biggest impact. Although it'd be nice to have a little bit of diversity too, though. It's just so, you know, you don't look like everybody else on paper. Right? But I think more important is, you know, if you are genuinely passionate about that and you really want to help out in that cause, then that's your thing, right? Go ahead and devote more time, try to volunteer more actively with that organization or with that volunteer opportunity as best you can. Okay. It's also important to make meaningful connections with the other people that are working with you in that volunteer context, be it your supervisors or your fellow volunteers, because that could be another way to evidence your involvement, right? So if you can get 1 or 2 strong recommendation letters from the people that you work for or work with, that could be a great way to show them that it's not just about the hours for you, it's also really that it's something that is personally important for you, okay? So let's take a look at some different options that you can consider at this point. Okay, so one of the more timely things that you can do for volunteering at this point is to do volunteering for the elderly. Because of course, senior citizens, the elderly are pretty much one of the most impacted populations right now because of the coronavirus, right? So many of them are pretty much on lockdown in their, you know, care homes or elderly centers. They're not even allowed visitors in many cases because they're too much at risk, right? So a lot of them are isolated, they're feeling really down and depressed. So it's really important to try to see if you can find ways to help them out. So you can do this by contacting your local senior centers. You can just look for the ones that are closest to you and ask them, you know, email the supervisors and try to see, I'd love to help somehow. What are some things that I can do? And more than likely, they will welcome your help, right? They'll try to find you some way that you can be of assistance to them. Okay, some of the simpler things that I've seen people do is you can help cheer up the residents, right? Video phone calls, just so you can they have some human contact is really important, right? Or you could just send them a nice, you know, like personally, you know, handcrafted card, right? Or send them an email just to, you know, tell them a joke, give them some things to kind of like help pick up their spirits, right? If it's not so bad in your particular neighborhood, you can even try to see if you can do some minor errands, like helping pick up groceries, for instance. But if you're doing something outdoors, then I really do caution you to make sure that you're taking all the necessary safety precautions, right? wear a mask, wear gloves, don't put yourself at risk for something like volunteering, right? So because your health is the most important thing here, right? There are organizations that are sort of like primarily focused on the elderly, like the AARP, which is the American Association of Retired People. They do have something called a mutual aid group, so you can contact your local mutual aid group and try to see if there are, already groups that you can join. There might even be like youth groups in your area where you can help out the elderly in your particular community. Now is also a good time for you to be able to do things like showcase your talents. So if you have a gift for music or the arts, it'd be an awesome way to be able to share that with people, right? So let's say if you're really good at violin or piano, right? So from home, you can go ahead and do maybe like live online performances for people. And I think they really appreciate that. I mean, you don't have to be like world class or anything, right? So as long as you're pretty good at it, you can lift up their spirits. You can bring some joy to people, especially now during these tough times. Okay, or you can even do recordings of it if you feel really sort of like self-conscious about doing things live. You can just do recordings and share that stuff. You don't even have to do video if you're a little bit like, if you're not exactly the most telegenic person. You can go ahead and just record just the audio part if you're really like good at music, for instance, right? So there are a lot of options to still showcase your talents or gifts. Another area where there are a lot of opportunities for online volunteering is tutoring younger children. We kind of alluded to this earlier, but you can set up online classes or tutoring for local elementary school and middle school students in your area, right? So how do you go about contacting them though, right? Well, you can go to bigger organizations that typically help with youth, right? Like the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, right? So there are all these organizations locally that you can contact to try to see if you can set up something, right? There are also online platforms like teensgive.org is a big one where you can register yourself as an online tutor, and they would try to contact you if they have students who are interested in getting help based on the subjects that you are particularly good at. You can also try to network with local organizations or nonprofits like your local church group, okay? To set up programs for younger kids, like talk to your pastor, talk to the local head priest or whatever, or even if you're not particularly religious, you can still contact local churches, right? It's a good way for you to have a network into a local community, right? So just try to find things that you can do. Right, then lastly, HS2 also has a nonprofit wing called Compassionate Scholars, and we are always trying to find new opportunities for you to do some volunteering. So if we do find new stuff, we will update everybody via email and try to let you know about the latest volunteer opportunities that we have, right? I mean, we did have things before like the Corazon project, but those are all things that involved actually being on site, which obviously, we had to sort of cancel or postpone for now, right? But once we have a few more online opportunities for you guys, we'll make those available to you as well. Okay, so other things you can do, fundraising, especially if you're into like business, right? You want to go for pre-business. Fundraising can be a good way to showcase that you actually have a lot of business related skills, right? Like marketing, for instance, right? So you could raise money for various causes, right? One of the ideas that you can do is use social media to raise awareness of various causes that are important to you, right? So like the elderly, laid off workers, their abandoned animals, for instance, if you're really into like animal rights, right? That could be important. You can also set up fundraising accounts through traditional or popular online platforms like GoFundMe, Kickstarter, and Patreon, right? To raise money, just contact your family and friends if you want to raise money for a specific cause, right? And it's up to you what those causes are, right? So it could be related to COVID-19 if you want to target a specific group of people who are sort of disproportionately affected by everything that's going on right now, right? Or it could just be general things that, are always important, people who always need these things. And it doesn't even have to be within the US. You can target people in other countries, for instance, right? So since money is tight right now, a lot of families are having to budget because, they're not always, some people have been laid off, some people have been furloughed. So it's important for you to be able to kind of like keep in mind that it's not really, you're not trying to get massive donations. It's more important that you be able to show like, hey, I managed to get money from, let's say, for example, 40 people, even if it's just like $5 to $10 each, and I managed to raise an amount of money to help out with a certain cause. I think it's more the effort that you're putting into it. A last option here is if you're interested in business, you can also go ahead and try your hand at setting up a microfinance account, right? So finance, of course, in the big picture is like, big banks loaning money to like corporations or governments, right? But microfinance would be like lending money to like smaller groups or individuals, right? So, there could be situations, for instance, where like even loaning as small as like $50 to $100 could make a huge difference for someone who lives in like a really impoverished third world country, right? So if that's something that interests you and you want to set this up, that could be something too that could show evidence that you're getting to understand sort of ins and outs of like having to manage a financial account, right? So one of the biggest and most traditional websites for this is you can look at something called kiva.org, right? That's a good place to start if you want to try your hand at doing this microfinancing. Okay, you can also try your hand at advocacy for important causes, right? So this is different from fundraising. This is you using your voice. This is you using your ability to kind of like get people's attention, right? So if you're really into like things like political science, you want to be a lawyer someday or something, this could be a great opportunity for you to advocate for certain causes. Keep in mind, right? So we're coming up to an election here. So it's also something where like you can go ahead and make people aware, right? Now, granted, teens won't necessarily be voting unless you're 18, but you can also make other people aware, like parents, about certain causes that youth are very much sort of like, care about or involved with, okay? So you can target specifically people who are like emotionally impacted by the coronavirus, for instance, volunteering with various helplines like crisistextline.org. There are teen helplines for teens who are having like emotional sort of troubles because of the situation. There are even suicide helplines that you can go ahead and maybe participate in if you feel like you're pretty good, you're a pretty good listener and you're pretty good at like talking and giving advice to people, right? Even teens can help out with that kind of stuff. You can also raise awareness of things like xenophobia and racism in the community, right? So you might have heard, right, with everything going on with the coronavirus, right, there have been things going out there, misinformation about people saying like, oh, it's like the China disease, if you're Asian, you're more likely to spread the disease or something, right? So there's a lot of, sort of ignorance out there about the origins of the disease and, like they mislabel people or treat people differently just because, you're Asian. Right. So if you want to help with that cause, there are a lot of, resources online. There are a lot of forums. There are a lot of people who are trying to promote more this thing in their local communities. Right. If you want to help out with other things like human rights as well, right, Amnesty International, which is one of the biggest NGO watch groups for human rights, has this program called Decoders. So if you want to be able to help out just on your computer or on your phone, there are ways that you can help out by, say, for example, alerting them to human rights violations because they'll show you some photographs of a certain area with satellite pictures or something. It's pretty cool, actually. So that could be something you can look at and try to see if you would be interested in doing something like that. And then lastly, there are opportunities for you to help out with awareness about educational inequality, right? Especially with everything going on with the testing right now, there's actually a campaign going on to try to promote more test optional schools. And they're trying to get people to sign the petition and try to promote the petition to other people and other families as well. So if that's a cause that's important to you, that could be a good option for you to consider, okay? All right, lastly here, this is just a potpourri of other options that you might have, right? Here's some other options, right? If you're really hands-on and you like sewing, you can actually make masks, right? So yes, it's not gonna be like the N95 quality ones that they use in medical centers and hospitals, but anything that you could use to cover up, it's still better than not having anything at all, right? And there are website that'll go through in terms of like, it'll teach you how to make these masks and it'll actually direct you to places where they're in dire need, right? There are actually like hospitals and clinics throughout the United States where the medical people who are working with these patients don't even have anything at all. And so they're in much more risk of contracting the coronavirus. So anything that can, you can provide to help them, they'll give you instructions. So you'll know how to make these masks or whatever, right? If you are fluent in Mandarin, you can read and write Mandarin, for instance, or any other foreign language for that matter. There is an organization called Translators Without Borders, where if you want to just help out translate things online, that could be a vital use because, they'll oftentimes use this for like nonprofit marketing material or something, right? So it could be a good way for you to use your language skills, okay? If that's not your thing, there are websites like Volunteer Match where you can find a lot of options as well, right? So there's actually a choice where you click virtual and you can look for online or virtual opportunities throughout the United States. It doesn't have to be in your local area if it's virtual anyway, right? You can also do things that we talked about earlier, and not just for the elderly. You can write cheerful emails or notes to people in your community, right? So to spread some, goodwill. Like if there's, a nice sort of like meme or joke that you want to put in like a card and hand it out to your neighborhood just to kind of like put a smile on people's faces. Yeah, I think those are good causes. It'll be good to be able to kind of like share that kind of stuff. There's also volunteer pet care, right? So some people who have to work many shifts to make ends meet, once people are allowed to go back to work, of course, right? Let's say, for instance, there are people in your neighborhood who happen to be working, like they work in a local hospital, but they can't stay home to take care of their pets, for instance. You can volunteer to like just take care of or just walk someone's pet for a while, okay? As a last option, if you want to do some volunteering for the United Nations, if international relations is your thing, the UN is also looking for volunteers of all ages. So that could be another option you can look into as well. Okay, so summer programs. I know this is one of the big, issues right now. A lot of people's plans have sort of been derailed because the summer programs that you were accepted to no longer has their program, right? So some of them have been outright canceled. They're just not having it all because they're just not allowed to have anything on campus, right? Some are shifting them to online or remote formats, but some don't even have the budget to do that. So if you have one that's online, great, keep it, right? Try to do your best within that program as best as possible, because it's still something good to have in terms of your summer plans, to have that centerpiece, right? To be honest, a lot of summer programs right now that are still accepting applications probably aren't very competitive, right? So don't just sign up for something and says like, hey, 2 weeks on this topic and it's all online, and you're not even getting things like college credit for it, because oftentimes that's just a cash cow for some colleges or some local businesses who are just trying to get some money, right? So if you are going to pay a tuition, make sure it's something where you get something tangible, like you get college credits for it or something, okay? Now, you could still report in your college applications that you were accepted to set programs, even though they were canceled, right? So it's still something that could be useful for you, especially if you got into some very competitive programs that are, got like really low acceptance rates. So what are your backup options at this point? Okay, so we already talked a lot about volunteering. You could even use your summer months to go ahead and do that. I mean, shoot, there are even some options to do things like online summer jobs. Okay, I know even for teenagers, you can do things like, customer service or just online sales, for instance. There are things that you can do even as teenagers, right? You can also, of course, take college courses. This is especially more helpful, especially for some of you that need the grade bump because your school went credit, no credit, or pass fail. So if you want to take some extra courses, this would be the right time to do it, to still have an impact in terms of your college applications, because it'll provide you a boost, right, in terms of having more grades on your transcript, okay? You can also work on some various special projects. If there's something that's important to you, you can just, set up your own research project, for instance, right? There are websites, for instance, if you're into like STEM or sciences, where you can set up at home, like independent research projects, right? Some of them are in the format of like, science fair type of projects. Some of them, you can just do independent research on a certain topic, right? Now, granted, it's not going to be the same scope that you would have if you had access to a college lab, but you can take a look at some of the options in terms of what people did in prior summers and try to see if you can do something smaller scale on your own, right? Okay, so of course, one of the biggest things you can do this summer is to look for courses for college credit. Okay, one of the main things why this is important is that it goes a long way to be able to show your love of learning to colleges, right? Because you can show that you're doing things outside of your school curriculum, right? You want to show them that you're interested in learning about all these different topics, right? This is actually really good, especially if you need a GPA boost, because it could be a chance for you to get more letter grades into your overall academic record, okay? So it can positively impact your GPA, even if this is not going to be listed in your high school transcript. Keep this in mind, all right? Because I get a lot of questions about like, oh, but I heard my counselor say they're not going to put it in the transcript. It doesn't matter, right? Even if they don't put it in your high school transcript, you can still go ahead and send a transcript from that college directly to the colleges that you're applying to and get credit for it that way, right? In fact, almost all universities will do their own in-house recalculations of your GPA anyway. They're not just going to straight up look at the number based on whatever your transcript has, right? So they will always factor in any outside coursework you took, right? In fact, for like the UC application, the system already does it for you, right? So when you send in your UC application, you're even going to put in like the grades that you got for any like community college classes, UC level classes, right? It's all going to be in there already, okay? You would just simply have to send in the transcripts and grades separately though. So that's an important thing to remember. So if you're going to be a senior next year, you want to make sure that any online courses you took or will take, you got to remember to go ahead and order the transcript and then send it directly to the colleges and universities that you're applying to. Okay. All right. Another thing is that some of you may not be aware of this, but the UC GPA, many of you are probably aware that they only will factor in 10th grade and 11th grade. But what some of you may not know is that they actually count all the summers between 9th grade and 12th grade, okay, as part of your UC GPA, right? So technically they will count the summer after 9th grade, the summer after 10th grade, and even the summer after your junior year as part of your UC GPA. So if some of you are just winding down junior year, there's still a chance for you to be able to take some courses to boost your GPA, right? So keep that in mind, right? This summer, if you can take 1 or 2 college level classes, that could have the same impact as having 1 full year of an AP class, because they count each college class as basically the same weight as an AP semester, which is based on a 5.0 scale, okay? All right, so one of the options that you have is that HS2 has partnered with UC Riverside to offer online courses this summer, right? There are 2 available sessions for 5 weeks. You get credit courses, right? You get a UC transcript, which could pretty much transfer to whatever college you're planning to go to later on, right? So the courses available, we have 4, right? There's Intro to the Study of Race and Ethnicity, Introduction to Anthropology, Introduction to Archaeology, and Macroeconomics, right? So if you want to take one here, right? So, you know, you don't have to look at classes that are only related to your major, because I know some people look at this and go like, but none of them are related to my major. Doesn't really matter. It's still college courses. It still goes a long way to show that you have all these academic or intellectual interests beyond just your major anyway, okay? You can also mix and match this with other programs. Like you can take one of these courses over here, and you can also take another one at your local community college, which we'll talk about later on, and pick a class that's related to your major there. One of the great things about this program actually is, in addition to receiving a transcript from a UC, which makes it easier to transfer than, say, for example, like something from a community college, is that it'll automatically already satisfy a UC general education requirement, because these classes have already been approved by a UC for general ed purposes, which means you would end up taking fewer classes in colleges for sure. Unlike, say, for example, an AP test where they may or may not give you course credits for the actual AP tests, right? You'd still get some units like elective units, but it may not satisfy actual course requirements at whatever school you get into. The great thing about this is that you know it'll satisfy at least a couple of your UC or any private schools general ed requirements. Another key advantage to this program is that in the 5 weeks, the first 2 weeks are devoted to training you on how to write college academic essays, right? So the instructors will go through, train you about critical thinking skills and writing skills, and then for the last 3 weeks, they'll be focusing on the content based on this specific course. And the great thing about this is, unlike some other programs out there where they just toss you in with college students and the instructors aren't really going to coach you in terms of how to succeed in a college class, this is really designed to give high schoolers a lot more advantages, right? And this is exclusive to HS2 students, which means you don't have to worry about being in a class and feeling overwhelmed because all these college kids are basically just talking over your head, or they already know the expectations of the instructor in terms of writing the essays and everything, okay? So this is definitely set up to make you more successful than, say, for example, some other programs out there where you just have to kind of fend for yourself. Okay, so you can also take classes at a local community college. This is always a great option because, first of all, you can take it in any California community college. If it's online, it doesn't have to be the one closest to you geographically, right? You can usually take 1 or 2 college courses during the summer, and pretty much almost all the courses now being offered by these community colleges are pretty much now online, okay? It's also important for you to double check that these courses are in fact UC CSU transferable. because there might be some courses that you take, like Intro to Excel and Spreadsheets, for instance, right? Where you may not even get any sort of credits by taking that course, right? Because it's deemed too easy, or it just simply won't transfer over to any of the schools that you're applying to. Keep in mind that you will need to get permission from your school counselor. Now, unlike in previous months or previous years where you would need to get an actual form signed directly by your school counselor, these days they will accept just an email from your counselor, right? So let your counselor know that you're hoping to register at a certain local community college, let them know which courses, and as long as you send them an email from your school counselor with that counselor basically saying, yes, I approve of this student signing up for these two classes, that's more than enough for many community colleges, okay? If you do sign up for these courses though, make sure you can do well, right? Don't bite off more than you can chew and say like, I'm gonna take 2 of the hardest STEM classes there and I'm gonna really impress colleges if you don't think you can handle it, right? So if you've been getting A's in that subject in high school, then you could probably do okay. But if you're struggling and you're getting B's and C's in that subject, don't automatically assume that just because it's a community college that you think your high school is necessarily gonna be, you know, harder than a local community college. It's going to be pretty challenging too. So you might want to ask advice. You can email us at counselors@hs2counseling.com if you want advice as to whether or not certain courses would be appropriate for you, given your GPA and given your academic track record. Okay. And lastly, don't take courses that would duplicate courses that you need to take or have taken in your high school, which means, let's say, for example, you already took AP biology in your high school, then don't take Introduction to Biology because that would duplicate the content that you would have already taken. Same goes for classes that you need to take to graduate, right? So if you're taking like government as part of your school, don't take like a government class, right? Because, you know, it would duplicate the credits from your high school. Okay, some other last options here. You can also take online AP courses during the summer. Okay, so it would be a good way for you to kind of like rack up some extra credits and stuff and be able to prepare for the tests. The only downside to this though is you'd have to wait until May to actually take the AP test, right? Because there's not going to be AP tests available early fall when you're done with this summer class. So that's the only downside of taking AP online classes now. You can still get weighted credit, and for some schools, they may be able to count it as part of your high school transcript. You just need to run that by your school counselor to see whether or not they will accept credits from a different online high school, okay? All right, so HS2 is also working with a local private school in Southern California called Southlands Christian to offer some AP online courses this summer. So the schedule's pending, but as soon as it's finalized, we will go ahead and send that to all of you. There are other options like Apex Learning or National University Virtual High School is another option as well. And that's especially good if you need to make up a semester, for instance, right? Because it's easier to make up a course if it's the same level. Let's say, for example, you had a bad grade in an AP class and you want to take something that's like the equivalent class, that would be a good option for you. But it doesn't have to be all for credits, right? I think it's still important for colleges, even if you take some non-credit courses, like if you take it through edX or Coursera, because it shows that you actually want to learn something purely for its own sake, and you're not just doing it because you need college credits, okay? So lastly, just some closing here before we go to Q&A. It's important for you to use this time to challenge yourself one way or another, okay? Be creative, think outside the box, try to find things that not everybody else does. But it's important, you know, even if you don't necessarily have that thing where it's like, oh, wow, I'm the only one who does it. It's still important to do something this summer, right? Don't just be content to sit down there and say like, well, all my clubs are canceled, all my summer programs are canceled. I'm just gonna sit home and play video games all day or just hang out with my friends on chatting online, right? So it's still important for you to develop new skills. It's still important for you to show that you're learning things because that's how you're gonna impress colleges with your extracurriculars now and this upcoming summer, okay? So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up the presentation and open things up for Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free, don't hesitate to email us at counselors@hs2counseling.com. And if you don't have an answer to one of the questions that you asked today in the Q&A, we can always answer it there, right? Or if it's fairly like individualized, it's like unique to your own circumstances and you don't want to bother everybody else with your question, I think that could be a good way for you to still get, you know, a solid answer for those. Okay, so at this point, if you have any questions, kindly type it out in the Q&A box, right? Not the chat box, but the Q&A box, right? Now go ahead and answer these to the best of my ability. Okay, so Ashley asks, Since there's less focus on this semester, will colleges consider freshman year more heavily? That's a good question, Ashley. I guess it depends on each individual school what they're going to be focusing on. They may, right? But they may also just take a look at things based on like what you do next semester as well, right? That could be a very real possibility, though, that they could put a little bit more, I guess, weight on freshman year because it's the grades that they do have available. Okay, will we have access to this meeting afterwards? Yes, as I said earlier, we will find a way to record these and send it out, okay? All right, Joanne asks, so if tests are optional and we still take it but we get a low score, will we still have to report it to the college we're applying to? If it's test optional, no, that's the whole point of being test optional, right? Is that you have the option to submit the test or not. There might be schools that still require them though, in which case you might want to check to see whether or not the school will accept something called score choice for SAT. But for ACT, you can pretty much just hide the score regardless of what the policy is. I think one of the main changes this September is that they're making it so that you can just report whichever total scores or sub-scores you want, right? So you can totally hide scores that you don't want them to see. Okay, another person asks, do I need school counselor sign off to take the UCR HS2 classes? No, you don't. Actually, that's one of the advantages there, that it's not bound to that same requirement that community colleges have, because that's a unique thing to community colleges, that you have to get the okay or the approval of your school counselor. For this one, you just take it and then you can get credits through UCR with us, okay? Next question is, have the UC universities ceased to consider SAT subject tests in applications? As far as I know, they're making it entirely optional. They don't really look at it as much, but for certain majors, they still can, right? So that's another option as well, okay? All right, next one, is a counselor's permission needed for UCR classes? I think we already answered that. Okay, is there any way to pick up SAT practice packets from HS2 with the answers? Email us at counselors@hs2counseling.com and we'll let you know which tests we have available for you. Okay, next one. Do private schools accept community college courses and give you college course credit? Also, do private schools put the community college you take into their GPA system? Yes, but it depends on the college. Probably the most competitive up there, like say for instance, like a Caltech, it's up to them. Like they will take a look at the course and whether or not they will award you credits for it. So the more competitive the school, I would say it depends. If it's like a mid-tier college, they most likely will pretty much accept any community college classes. But keep in mind though, even if they don't give you GPA credit for it, there's still the advantage of showing colleges that you are doing something actively to try to, you know, increase your knowledge of certain areas, right? So in a way, it could have just as much impact as like say a summer program because they still see it as a good activity, right? Even if you don't actually get the grade bump as a result of it. But to be honest, most colleges will in fact go ahead and give you credits for that. Okay, next one. Do I need school approval before taking AP classes on BYU? No, I don't believe so, right? So I don't think you need a counselor to sign off for that, right? So you can just go ahead and register and then you can take it and then just send the transcript directly, right? So this is not a school policy issue for your high school. This is something that community colleges have as sort of like a unique requirement in order to satisfy all their paperwork. Okay, next one. Will the June SAT be canceled? It already has, right? So they already announced it that they pretty much canceled the June SAT. So you really need to be targeting, I guess, August and September now. August for SAT, September for ACT. So Kevin asks, what happens to my GPA if my school switch to pass-fail? Well, if they switch to pass-fail, obviously they will not factor in that semester into the GPA, but that means that all the previous semesters where you did have a grade will be factored in, right? So many colleges will have to take a look at this through a different lens, right? They're not just going to be looking at it purely based on, you know, like your GPA from previous semesters. That's why I think things like your recommendation letters will also be pretty important because, you know, they'll be able to get some feedback from your teachers in terms of how you handled all the work even during a pass-fail semester, okay? All right, next question is, if you've taken the SAT or ACT a previous year, will your score be discounted because the tests aren't available this year? I'm not sure what you mean by discounted. No, not really. In fact, if anything else, that's more of a known quantity to them, right? Because if they change the format and make it online, colleges may be more skeptical of those tests, right? So I think if you already have a good score under your belt, you're kind of at an advantage, right? Because then you already have a score based on a test format that colleges know about. Okay, next question by Yoko. Since SAT has canceled a few tests so far and we're not sure about future test registration dates yet, is it wise to consider taking ACT as a backup? It always is wise for you to consider both SAT and ACT anyway. It just gives you more options to consider. However, ACT also has canceled their June test date. So it's not just SAT only, right? So you're gonna wanna take a look at future test dates. Now, Yoko, it depends on your situation, which test format you're better suited for, but for some students, they actually do better in one test format or another. So if you haven't tried, say, for example, ACT, you might find out that actually that might be better suited for you anyway. Okay, so Ryan asks, are there any other colleges that offer college credit other than community colleges? Sure, yeah. I mean, I gave you UCR as an example, right? There are other universities that will do their own sort of in-house programs. But for private schools, it's going to be a lot more costly because if you're getting college credits for them, they're pretty much charging you what they would normally charge for a semester, right? So for instance, like if you're getting units from Stanford, Stanford has a summer pre-college, right? But the Stanford Summer College basically charges you like something like $5,000 or $6,000 per course, right? So it can get really expensive. Whereas community college, you know, for some students, that's free if you're a California public high school student, okay? So there are other options though that you can look for that will give you, you know, a pretty good alternative. Okay, next one. Will AP Computer Science A and Computer Science Principles consider duplicate courses? Which one should I take as a junior? No, they're not considered duplicate courses, right? If your school has both, they don't consider them duplicate courses. They're usually in succession. So you're gonna wanna consider what is offered at your high school and then basically, you know, take them in the succession that is advised to you by your HS2 counselor and by your school counselor. Okay, do you think UCs may look at freshman year or start taking rec letters since they'll be missing a whole semester of grades from our junior year? That's a good question. That may be on the table. I haven't heard anything definitive, but it's probably an option for the UCs, given that they'll be missing potentially a whole semester to consider you on, right? So they may very well have some other things that they might introduce. I mean, Berkeley's already piloted a program to get recommendation letters. So it wouldn't surprise me if the UCs decided to get for, you know, ask for recommendation letters this year, right? So, but I mean, like I said, nothing definitive. I will let you know in a future seminar if they in fact actually added that. Okay, next one. Should I switch to pass-fail if I'm at risk of getting a B in a class, which could further sink my GPA? So Ashley, that's very situational. But if you're already getting straight A's prior to this, yeah, it might be an option for you to consider pass-fail, right? If you're at risk of getting a B at this point, okay? However, if there's a pretty decent chance that you might get an A, having the A's is also something valuable, right? So you might want to consider that because colleges may be aware that your school had the option to go pass-fail or having letter grades. So they might respect your transcript more if you actually had the letter grades on there. So it's debatable whether or not it's actually better to go pass-fail or have 1B in your transcript if you're a straight A student, okay? Next one, since the UC Riverside courses are exclusive to HS2 counseling program, will colleges see this opportunity as negative or unfair? No, not necessarily, right? I mean, there are a lot of programs that are specific, like, you know, there are programs that are specific to private schools where they offer their own in-house courses. There's nothing inherently unfair about that, right? So, I mean, you could get college credits from a whole bunch of different options, right? So if it were something that provides you an advantage that nobody else gets other than HS2 students, then that would be understandable. But getting college credits is not unique to this program, right? You can get college credits elsewhere, right? So it's not necessarily something where it would be unfair just for HS2 students, okay? Okay, next one. As far as the costs of UCR's program, go ahead and email your manager since I don't handle any of the business side of any HS2 programs. So go ahead and contact your local HS2 branch or talk to your local HS2 manager and they'll fill you in on the details. Okay, next one. Should you take courses that align with your major or just courses all across the table? I mean, it depends, Ryan. I would say it's probably a good idea for you to go ahead and maybe, if you're thinking of possibly taking 2 courses, I normally recommend maybe taking one that's related to your major and one just for like diversity, because colleges also want to see that you have like all these broad interdisciplinary interests, right? So if you wanted to take like a UCR course because you're kind of interested in like archaeology, but you also wanted to take like a computer science course because that's your major, right? That's probably a good combo, right? You can take one of each and be able to kind of like still handle both in one summer, right? So it all depends on your interests, right? But I think there is some logical sense in picking classes, even if they have nothing to do with your major, because not only will they you satisfy all these general ed requirement classes that you have to take later anyway, but it goes to show that you're not just a one-dimensional type, right? Because a lot of colleges will probably stereotype students, especially here in the Bay Area, as being like, oh, here's another Asian pre-med kid, here's another Asian computer science candidate, right? So showing that you have intellectual interests that are broader would actually help you. Okay, next one. I want to get credits for a certain class, and I found some websites that provide online summer class, but the websites seem not to belong to IUSD. Does it affect me getting corresponding credits? Like I said earlier, if it's courses that are college level, it doesn't matter where you get them from because you will get a transcript directly from those institutions. If it's a high school level class, you're gonna wanna talk to your school counselor. Just email your school counselor to see whether or not those classes can actually be transferred into your school transcript. Okay, next question from Joseph, right? My school already switched to credit, no credit system for our semester final grades. Can I submit the unofficial transcript that still contains A's and B's to colleges next year for the application? No, unfortunately, because you're going to want to send the transcript through the school, right? Colleges are going to be leery of any unofficial transcripts anyway, so they're not going to put much weight on that. If you're doing it because you want the grades, my advice is just go for the credit, no credit, and then do something like some college courses online this summer, and then have grades that way. I think that's probably better than trying to ask your counselor to submit like unofficial grades, because there's not going to be anything that officially backs that up. Okay, Ashley asks, does your high school limit the amount of community college classes? I don't think it's the high school. I think it's the actual community colleges themselves will probably limit you to like 2 courses, right? Is generally what I've seen per semester, right? And 2 is a lot, to be honest, right? I don't think you want to be taking 3 or 4 summer classes, because keep in mind, right? The semester is much shorter during the summer. You'll probably be finishing this stuff in like 6 to 8 weeks. So unlike a normal semester where you can take 3 or 4 community college classes in one semester, trying to cram in everything is a lot during the summer months, and having 2 courses or more than 2 courses might actually be overkill. It might actually do you harm, and you might not be able to get good grades on those courses. Okay, last question. Are the 4 classes mentioned before the only UCR classes offered? As of right now, unfortunately, yes. We will potentially open up some, for sure during the fall, right? Depending on the response and how many people sign up, we might actually have way more classes available during the fall. But there's an outside chance that there might be 1 or 2 more classes opened up during the summer. We'll just have to wait and see. We need to talk to our contact, the director from UCR, and try to see whether or not there might be more available classes. Okay. Another question here. What suggestion do you have if a junior got a C for one AP course? Well, if you got a C right now, then that might actually be a good reason why you might want to take more classes now during the summer. Because if you have more A's to sort of drown that out, it would sort of like wash it out. It would average it out a little bit more if you had a couple more A's in there, okay? I mean, C is not the end of the world, right? But obviously, like, if there is an option to go pass-fail, that might be a good option to consider now, right? So that's certainly something you want to consider. Okay, does an unpaid research assistant count as volunteer work? Yes, I guess you can count it as volunteer work if it's unpaid, although it's kind of its own thing. If you're doing research assistant work, that's its own separate category. It typically doesn't count as volunteering if you're doing it, say, for example, for a university, right? So it just fits a different category, let's just say. Okay, do good outstanding extracurriculars outweigh a low GPA? There is a spectrum to that, right? So obviously if your GPA is way lower than the school, no amount of extracurriculars is gonna help you out. okay, unless you're truly, truly exceptional, right? So let's say, for example, the school wants to recruit you for something, then yes, it might outweigh a low GPA, but not if it's too low. Do you know what I mean? Like if your GPA is significantly lower, where you're like below the 25th percentile of the university, you're probably not going to be able to get in even with a lower GPA. Okay. In this case, will extracurriculars entirely outweigh standardized testing if you include your test scores? There's no way to know for sure this year, but I would be willing to bet that they would take a much closer look at extracurriculars this year than they did in previous years, where they tended to put more weight on things like standardized test scores. Yeah, so if there was a year for that, this would be the year they would probably weigh extracurriculars more so than they do standardized testing. Okay, so of course, that does not mean don't take the test. That does not mean don't prepare for these things at the detriment of your SAT or ACT performance and just do more extracurriculars. Try to balance everything. Try to still spend time doing your SAT prep, but also make sure that you have a good use of your time right now instead of just staying at home and doing only your online classwork for school, right? Try to find yourself ways to get involved. There is a way that it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive with other options. There is a way for you to still have enough time to do SAT or ACT work, still have some extracurriculars, even if it's informal right now, and still plenty of time for you to do things during the summer. If you plan things right, it doesn't have to be a trade-off where it's one or the other, okay? All right, I have time for one or two last questions before we wrap things up today. Okay, so while choosing our college list, any percentage lower than 25th percentile according to niche, is that a good indication? I mean, to be honest, I would say anything lower than 25th percentile, you have no chance, right? So you shouldn't even really apply, right? If you're in the mid-range, you're competitive, but especially because like if you're Asian, you probably want scores closer to like the 75th percentile, to be honest, right? For you to be considered a competitive candidate, right? So anything below 25%, I wouldn't even bother. You don't really have much of a chance. So I'd say, yeah, probably 58% or above, you're reasonably okay. But to be competitive, to like, I have a decent chance at this school, I would actually be looking at the 75th percentile numbers for both GPA and test scores if they have it. Okay. For test scores, don't even use niche, right? Go ahead and look at the common data sets. That would be the most accurate place to look at the test score percentiles. Okay, so yeah, I think that's pretty much all the time we have for today. So if you had any follow-up questions for us, go ahead and email us at counselors@hs2counseling.com, and we'll try our best to go ahead and email you. It's the weekend right now, so we'll try to get back to you on Monday or Tuesday because many of us won't be checking the email on Saturday night or Sunday. So give us until Monday or Tuesday to get back to your questions then. Okay, so I hope you found the seminar helpful, right? If you have any follow-up questions, do let me know, right? I will have another one of these seminars 2 weeks from now, and the topic will be about college admissions in general and how coronavirus has changed everything. So we'll be talking a little bit about, some of the things we talked about today, like how colleges are going to view candidates, what kind of things can you do to enhance your chances for college acceptances now, right? So it's largely focused on college admissions. Now, that will be more relevant, obviously, for the juniors, but even freshmen and sophomores can find some use in it because you can use that information to sort of plan ahead. Right, so you will be able to access those links. You'll be emailed the links pretty much within the coming week or so, right? So I will see you all hopefully in a couple of weeks, right? So thank you for attending today's seminar, and as usual, stay safe and take good care of yourselves, okay? All right, bye everybody.